Hello everyone, welcome back to the class. So in today's video, I'm going to guide you to continue our reading of the Gourmet, the novel Gourmet by Lu Wenfu. And also I would like to provide some of my insights into this novel and wish to stimulate your thoughts about how food influences our daily life and how the historical and political environment kind of influence our idea about food and eating. So before we get into the actual content of the novel, the latter half of the novel, I would like to again make the connection between Zhang Dai and the Gourmet, especially to make a bridge between the pre-modern and the modern China. So I think we should always have this question in mind. So when we move from the pre-modern time, when we move from when Zhang Dai lived to the time when Lu Wenfu lived to the modern China, concerning food and eating, what have remained and what have changed? When you're thinking about eating as one of the human nature everybody acquires maybe from the very beginning of the history of a human race, how history kind of influenced or shaped our idea about food and eating. So first, if we specifically focusing on Zhang Dai and the Gourmet, I think one thing they shared is the same geographical location. So both Zhang Dai and Lu Wenfu are writing about something related to their own life, related to their hometown, that is the lower Yangtze region. You can consider that as the wealthiest and the most cultured place in China, especially in the pre-modern, in the early modern time, and so forth. But what about class hierarchy? Is there any change about the class hierarchy? I will say in Zhang Dai's time, I saw a lot of you have discussed in the forum, there's definitely some hierarchy about classes in the society. And when we move on to the Gourmet, we can see still between Gao Xiaoting and Zhu Ziye, there's some class hierarchy. It just, the class is not stable, it's always changing. Sometimes Zhu Ziye is higher in class than Gao Xiaoting, but when the revolution begins, Gao Xiaoting changed to a higher status than Zhu Ziye. So the hierarchy is changing, but it is still there. And what about the literati taste? What about the craving for the exquisite and special dishes? I think that kind of thing is also remained from the Zhang Dai's period to the Gourmet. And also the food. I think that is because food is very closely related to the geographical location. So when they both writing about the lower Yangtze region, it is highly possible they are writing about the same kind of food. So I will consider food as something that remains from the pre-modern to the modern time. But what have changed? What about food, taste, and cooking method? Definitely, because if we read other pieces about how to cook dishes in Zhang Dai's writing, we'll see we no longer use that method anymore. So the cooking method has some evolution by itself. But what about people's mind? I think it's debatable, but still you can see some slight difference from Zhang Dai's time when how people view the food to the Gourmet time when the working class and the wealthy class view the food differently. And also, what about the attitude towards money, food, and class? Are they changing? I think it's questionable, and I want to leave this question open, and I want you to think about whether our idea about food and money and classes has ever changed from the pre-modern to the modern time. And I want to introduce some very interesting philosophical thinking concerning eating and tasting. So this picture is a picture of Zhu Xi, who is a very famous philosopher of the Neo-Confucianism school. So you may heard of that Neo-Confucianism. So basically, one thing he proposed is very interesting about eating and tasting. So one day, one of his students asked, about eating and drinking, what can be considered as heavenly principle and what can be considered as human desire? So Zhu Xi said, To eat and drink is a heavenly principle, while to look for good flavor is human desire. So I think it's very interesting because here he make a very prominent distinction between heavenly principle and human desire. To eat, that instinct belongs to heavenly principle. It is allowed, while to look for special taste or to look for good flavor is human desire, which should be repressed. So basically, he was advocating to preserve the heavenly principle while eliminate the human desire. This kind of argument is highly questionable and got a lot of criticism in the early modern time, especially when the Republic of China has established. But still, I think it has something reasonable and is worth examining or re-examining again, especially in the context of Zhu Ziye and Gao Xiaoting's conflicts. So we can consider this question about what is considered a heavenly principle in Gao Xiaoting's eyes, while what is considered heavenly principle or human desire in Zhu Ziye's eyes. Why it is different, and how that ancient or traditional philosophy influenced their idea about eating and tasting. And also, I think one more question is, who actually can be said to understand the food? So first, I think we need to question the idea of what actually does understand mean. Does understand means I'm able to appreciate something? Or does understand mean I'm able to feel the joy of doing something? Or maybe I know the knowledge about something, I'm very knowledgeable about certain things like certain ingredients of food. Does that mean I understand it? And I think the further question will be, can people understand each other? Because I think in the Gourmet, one constantly repeated theme is that people cannot understand each other. Like Gao Xiaoting cannot understand Zhu Ziye. He just cannot understand why Zhu Ziye is so obsessed about food. And Zhu Ziye obviously doesn't understand why Gao Xiaoting feels humiliated when he asks him to buy food for him. So people has a lot of misunderstanding, which leads to some bigger consequences like the fighting of the classes, and also leading to minor kind of conflicts about the daily conflicts and the verbal kind of quarrel, a lot of things like that. So when we're talking about understanding a people, we need to take into consideration how class differences actually influences our idea or shaped our way of speaking, shaped our way of thinking. So class differences lead to the differences in taste. I think a lot of you already mentioned that in the forum. And also class differences lead to the differences in life philosophy, the way to enjoy life, or what does understand life, understand food mean, is different for different people because of their different classes. And you need to consider the idea of the philosophy, if we need to be specific, that is Hinduism versus political belief like the communist. How these two became the two poles in one spectrum, and how Gao Xiaoting and Zhu Ziye represent the two extremes of this whole spectrum. And maybe also the single-minded versus selfless. So who is single-minded? Is that Zhu Ziye? Who is selfless? Is that Gao Xiaoting? Does Gao Xiaoting think for other people other than himself? Does that really work that way? I think all these are the differences in life philosophies. And also, I think a lot of you may also think about that senses or taste or the taste for food are highly restricted by your own experience. So when you are born in a lower classes like a working class, your idea, your experience shaped your way of approaching to different food and the ability to appreciate certain food. So just to keep in mind how and to recognize how big the influence can be, and maybe sometimes even unconsciously shaping our idea about food. And then I think the last question is, when we're talking about understanding, so who can understand food, can people understand each other? Then the last question is sympathy or empathy possible? If we belong to two very different classes, if we have so different taste about food, can we sympathize with each other? And I think the more important question is, in which way or to which extent can we sympathize with another person? I think Gao Xiaoting finally kind of has this kind of empathy with Zhu Ziye, because they both encountered a lot of difficulty in the political movement, and also have some very similar life encounter that makes he eventually is able to sympathy with Zhu Ziye. But this question still lingers and will continue to surface throughout this course. That is sympathy or empathy possible when we're talking about taste, when we're talking about the idea about food? And one quote I love so much is when the big head Ding told Gao Xiaoting that, I would, however, like to draw your attention to a strange psychological phenomenon. It seems that the palate of the bourgeoisie is similar to that of the proletariat. The capitalists prefer shrimp to shredded meat and cabbage, and once they've tasted them, so do the proletariats. So when they've got the money, they order shrimp. But you keep pushing shredded meat and cabbage at them, I'm surprised they haven't come after you with a hammer. So you see, there's a lot of ironic way of describing the class struggle and how that related to different classes. And I found that very interesting, and actually Lu Wenfu wrote it very directly, saying, first, money works for all. When you got the money, of course you got you got the access to a higher or more refined cuisine, and then you would like to buy it, and you would like to try it. The fact that you cannot afford it doesn't mean you don't like it. It's just you don't have the ability to approach to it. So sometimes maybe the working class and the privileged class, they share something. That is the taste for refined food. So I think for a novel so strongly emphasis on the class struggle, to have such a conclusion is a very interesting thing. And I think we can talk about that more in Friday's section. And finally, if last slide is talking about food and politics, I think one last thing we need to address is, does food itself have some politics? So does the food has its own politics, and does the act of eating food have a political nature about it? And my short answer to this kind of question is yes. So I think food eating or sense itself is politics. Thinking about the anti-Ordo movement in the modern period. So the idea is, the modern the city is, or the more civilized the people they are less of Ordo. And the stinky place is considered barbarian or less civilized or things like that. So negative part, but without Ordo is considered the superior. And also, I think a more close example is organic food. So why we have organic food? Does that, I think you've heard a lot of news about it. Some people claim it's almost a myth, because it's just some sort of vegetable, or not only vegetable, there are some sort of ingredients raised in a certain way to make it look or make it has a label of expensive. And also the vegetarian movement, it also has its own politics. And I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that the function of all these different tastes or different tastes about food is differentiation, or they performed well about the to differentiate different groups of people in one society. So I would say by claiming we have different taste, or by claiming we like different food, we are naturally differentiated from each other. No matter it's individual differences or class differences, but we are in fact or honestly differentiated. And that is one thing when we're thinking about food and class, we can thinking about how that is able to differentiate us. How people, like when they are eating organic food, they are more towards a healthy life, and when they didn't eat organic food, they care less about themselves. Where does all these ideas come from? Okay. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a comments and thoughts down below in the comment section. And I hope you enjoyed it. See you on Friday. Okay. Bye.